good morning po. Richaela Lopez po and I'm here to discuss yung report po namin about kay David Boss. Before tayo mag-proceed sa evolutionary theory niya, ipapakilala po muna natin kung sino po yung may ng theory na yun, which is si David Boss. So, sino nga ba si David Boss? Excuse me. So, si David Boss po is a professor of psychology at University of Texas, Austin. Tapos, he is known for his evolutionary psychology, research on mate selection with the basis on human sex differences, then his profound works on human mating strategies, then defines and distincts his works in the field of psychology. Born on April 14, 1953, he acquired his PhD in psychology from University of California, Berkeley. Tapos, he is most distinguished for his works and in-depth researches in human mating, then relationship, then yung conflicts arising between the sexes, then prestige, social, reputation, status, emotional, ganyan, mga jealousy, homicide, and most recently, the issues related to stalking. Sabi ko. Then, tapos, he proposed the idea daw na prototype theory into psychology of personality, which says that traits are used as categorization daw po ng personality, which means that how strongly a trait defines a certain personality. Then David Buss differentiated the uh, he differentiated between the short-term and long-term mating strategies po. Kung saan, ginamit niya yung socio-sexual orientation inventory for determining that if the person is in favor for a long-term serious relationship or shows he differentiated between the short-term and long-term mating strategies po. Kung saan, ginamit niya yung socio-sexual orientation inventory for determining that if the person is in favor for a long-term serious relationship or a short-term hookup. So, yung S SOIR, ah so yung SOIR, isa po itong questionnaire na kung saan ipapasagot po to sa mga lalaki at babae. Then, malalaman po doon if they're into long-term or pang short-term hookup lang po. Excuse me. According sa research din ni David Buss, he concluded the through the experiment po that men who showed a woman's face preferred long-term mating relationship.
Kanina, nakilala na natin kung sino si David Boss. So, let's proceed to evolutionary theory. So, evolution or change over time occurs through the process of natural and sexual selection. So, in response to the problem in our environment, we adapt both physically and psychologically to ensure our survival and reproduction. So, it connects evolutionary principles with modern psychology and focuses primarily on psychological adaptation, so changes in the way we think in order to improve our survival. So, meron siyang two major evolutionary psychological theories. So, yung una dyan is yung sexual strategies theory, which is described as the psychology of human mating strategies and the ways in which women and men differ those strategies. So, yung pangalawa is yung error management theory, which is describe the evolution of biases in the way we think about everything. So, later on, mas mas matatakal natin ng mainam yung dalawang yan. So, to understand deeper kung ano ba talaga yung evolutionary um, theories or evolutionary processes, we will present to you some of the most important elements of evolution as they impact the psychology. So, evolutionary theory helps us piece together the story of how humans we propose. So it also helps to explain why we behave as we do in our daily life. So yan. Evolutionary psychology is not a distinct branch of psychology, but rather a theoretical lens that is currently informing all branches of psychology. It is based on a series of logically consistent and well confirmed premises. So, first one there is evolutionary processes. Have sculpted not only the body but also the mind, the psychological mechanism it houses, and the behavior it creates. So, the second one is many of those mechanisms are best conceptualized as a psychological adaptation. Adaptations decide to solve problems that historically contribute to survival and reproduction, comprehensive and multidimensional. So yung pangatlo, psychological adaptation as well as byproducts of those aforementioned adaptation. So last one, most importantly, the idea that psychological mechanisms have adaptive function is a required, not an optional. So take note of that because I'm component of comprehensive psychological science. So basics of evolutionary theory. So evolution simply means change over time. So like what I mentioned earlier. So we think of organism, including humans, as having two large classes of adaptation. So or traits and behaviors that evolve over time to increase our reproductive success. So the first class of adaptations are called survival adaptations. So mechanisms that help our ancestors handle the first hostile forces of nature. So for example nito is for us in order to survive in a very hot temperature, we develop set plants to cool ourselves. In order to survive very cold temperatures, we develop naman siya every mechanism. The speedy contraction and expansion of muscles to produce warmth. Sexual selection theory. So, it describes how evolution has shaped us to provide a mating advantage rather than just a survival advantage and occurs through two distinct pathways. So, yung intersexual competition and intersexual selection. So, later on, mababanggit natin yan. So, Charles Darwin noticed that there were many traits and behaviors of organisms that could not be explained by survival selection. So, sexual selection occurs through two processes. Yun nga, the first is the intrasexual competition, which occurs when members of one sex compete against each other, and the winner gets to mate with the member of the opposite sex. So the second one, the second process of sexual selection is preferential mate choice, also called intersexual selection. So, in all sexually reproducing species, adaptation in both sexes, males and females, exists due to survival selection and sexual selection. So, however, unlike other animals where one sex has dominant control over mate choice, humans have mutual mate choice. That is, both men and women typically have a say in choosing their mates. So, mas appropriate sila dun sa second process natin, which is the intersexual selection. So, and both mates value qualities such as kindness, intelligence, and dependability that are beneficial to long-term relationships, qualities that make good partners and good parents. So let's proceed to gene selection theory. So, in modern evolutionary theory, all processes boil down to an organism genes. So, genes are the basic units of heredity. So, alam natin yan since meron tayong subject na genetics nung last sem, no? So, or this is the information that pass along in DNA that tells the cells and molecules how to build the organism and how that organism should behave. So, ayan. Genes that are better able to encourage the organism to reproduce and thus replicate themselves in the organism offspring have an advantage over competitive genes that are less able. So, essentially, genes can boost their own replicative success in two basic ways. So, yung una dyan is yung they can influence the odds for survival and reproduction, or the organism, their in individual reproductive success or fitness. So, in the second one, genes can also influence the organism to help other organisms who also contain those genes, known as genetic relatives. So, to survive and reproduce, which is called inclusive fitness. No? So, understanding gene replication is the key to understanding modern evolutionary theory. So, it is also fits well with many evolutionary psychological theories. Pero, for the time being, we'll ignore genes and focus primarily on actual adaptation that evolved because they helped our ancestors survive and or reproduce. So sexual strategies theory. So sexual strategy theory is based on sexual selection theory. It is proposed that humans have evolved a list of different mating strategies, both short-term and long-term, that vary depending on culture, social context, parental influence, and personal mate value, just like desirability in the mating market. So, in its initial formulation, sexual strategies theory focus on the differences between men and women in mating preferences and strategy. So, it is anchored in sexual selection theory, predicts specific similarities and differences in men and women, mating preferences and strategies. Whether we seek short-term or long-term relationship, many people or many personality, social, cultural, ecological factors will influence who our partners will be. Last, we have error management theory. So it deals with the evolution of how we think, make decisions, and evaluate uncertain situations. That is a situation where there's no clear answer how should we behave. No. And for the last, and for the conclusion, sexual strategies theory and error management theory are two evolutionary psychological theories that have received much empirical support from dozens of independent researchers. So, but there are many other evolutionary psychological theories such as social exchange theory, for the example, that also make predictions about our modern behavior and preference too. So that concludes our report. Thank you so much po and sana may natutunan kayo.